Hello, and welcome to another episode of Paranormal NL, a place where people of Newfoundland and Labrador can share their paranormal experiences here and anywhere else in the world. Today we have on the line Mr. Henry Crane. Now, he's the chair of tourism from Bell Island. He's also the treasurer from Radio Bell Island, and he sits on the town council of Bell Island. And he has lots of different paranormal stories to share with us today about Bell Island. Hi, Henry.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on the show today.
That's not a problem. My pleasure.
So, what would you like to talk about with some of the paranormal experiences or stories that you've like to share about Bell Island?
Well, Bell Island, for the longest time, just to lead into it, for the longest time, we attempted to have very well done, by the way, to hide our folklore and our supernatural happenings. But I always felt that was the wrong thing to do, and so I've taken a lot of time to bring up the stories and our folklore and our culture about the paranormal experiences that take place on Bell Island, as well as the. I guess you're going to talk about paranormal. I guess we're going to have to. That includes the ghosts and everything else to go with it. But we've had as late as February of this year, we've had three psychics who were part of a production team come here, and they have verified what we already knew, and other paranormal people have said that Bell Island is probably the most haunted island in all of North America, because every inch of it is just about haunted, and it has its different ghosts and entities, its fairies and spooks, you name it, and it's all there, from very benign to very malignant types spirits who really you should not want to even be near.
Now, Henry, are you referring to the T&E History's Most Haunted show that aired
in September? That's the show that I'm referring to. That's just one of them. We've had about 6 or 7 production companies come here over the last 5 or 6 years, and film us and hear our stories. Even the Rogers Cable TV has got an episode of it. We've turned some of it into a play called The Ghosts of Bell Island. But we had another production company come here in the latter part of July, and they took the full had full flavor of what our folklore and our ghosts and our history is like when it comes to paranormal.
That's exciting. And for our listeners, you can listen to History's Most Haunted on T&E. It did air on September 8th of 23, and I do believe it was Corrine, Carrie, Leanne, I think it's Sellenbach and Kelly Ireland. Maybe they're the 3 psychics you were referring to.
That's right. That's 3 of them.
Very exciting. So tell me more.
Pardon?
Oh, tell us some more.
Well, they revolve themselves around the ghost of Dobbin's Garden and the spirits of the sailors who died tragically during the sinkings of the ore boats during World War II. And they also they used a residence house here, and where those bodies were laid out. And some were pulled out of the water and they were already passed on. Some people they took some of the sailors and put them in their house, and some of them passed away in the house. So they really highlighted that, and then they highlighted the hauntings down in the number 4, or in the, I say number 4, but down in the mines collars. And I mean, there's 106 men died down there from the time that the mines opened till it closed, which is 1895 to 1966. And folklore has it here on Bell Island that if a miner died in the mines, then that spirit was doomed to reside in the mines for eternity. And that's pretty much held true, because people have had sightings in the mines of miners who died so very tragically, for everything from a fall of ground, which is a pile of rock caving in on them, to have been blown to pieces by dynamite. So that's the 3 areas they concentrated on. But the more I'm going to say the more diabolical, the most hated of the spirits here on this island is the White Woman. The White Woman is also a very tragic story of a young woman, and a lot of people don't like her because of the story, but it is the facts. The facts are the facts. It was true. She dated a married man, and he she wanted him to leave his wife. He refused, and he strangled her and threw her in a community well. And since that time, up until 1969, I believe it was, she haunted the area up around Scotia Number 1 West Mines, and she beat the living hell out of a lot of men. And they, in turn, would tell that they got some pretty good whacks at her, but their fists went right through her. And when it went through her, it's like it was going through cold, wet steel. But her fists were as hard as the rocks and as cold as hell itself. And she could be found on Bell Island for the longest time. And the ghost of Dobbin's Garden is probably the most famous of all the ghosts. But you're not going to see this entity in the dead of winter. She just doesn't come out. She comes out during the farming season, from setting seeds to harvesting, and she's specifically to Dobbin's Garden, where it is said where she was smothered by the German sailors back in World War II. And of course, the most hated and feared entity on the whole island is what we call, or what's been known as, the Fairy Queen, or the Queen of the Fairies. And they say this is the actual home of the fairies themselves. This is where she resides. She can spread her evil anywhere, but on Bell Island, her power is strongest, and she controls, or she holds sway or holds power over all the other entities. They do her will, and she can appear as she needs to be. Some people call it shape shifting. There's other words for it, but if she's able to command the fairies. And our fairies are not like the little Dublin, Ireland type fairies where they're 2 feet tall and as pleasant as can be. Ours are very malevolent in nature and act on her will. And she can actually touch you and spread the venom of the fairies, the evilness of the fairies right into your veins. She can, she can disfigure people. She can make them disappear into the woods, never be seen again, or she can let you go back to your family and carry on that way. And you'll never know, except people around the person. What'll happen is they'll be colder, they'll be withdrawn. They will look like they looked, but they will not be that person again. And so she appears as a young woman, but she can appear as she needs to be.
Henry, would she be considered what Newfoundlanders call the hag?
Well, the hag, they tried to put that term upon the ghost of Dobbin's Garden because, like the Fairy Queen, she is actually quite, from people who have experienced her from a distance and survived, she's quite beautiful. So there's no hag about her. It's the same thing with the white woman, because the legend is based on a true story, and some of this woman's relatives on both sides of the fence are still here on the island. There's actually pictures of this woman from within her family of what she looked like. She was pretty easy on the eyes as well, but the hag, she was also a pretty girl, but she was murdered in the swamp. And at the bottom of Dobbin's Garden, she was, legend has it, she was captured by the Germans as she tried to spread the word they were on the island, because she knew them from way back. And when she got away, she called for help, but nobody came to help her, and so they smothered her in the swamp. At the time when she disappeared, she was on her way back home to Upper Island Cove, and she was never seen again. And she's having I think it was called a frock back in the day. It was a half-sleeveless, I'm going to call it a cloak, but it was a frock that had buttons in the front, a little opening, and it was an off-white. And as she appeared for the first time, the men, now she never killed anybody. That's the thing about her. She just smothers them with this stench and decayed, and that was her flesh. And look, what was left of, there's scabby face, empty eyes, sockets. The breath on her is worse than the foul smell of methane, and it's a rotting corpse. And she overpowers men with the stench. Their feet lock to the ground, and she just crawls up over them on hands and knees, and she delivers the same message each time to every single one of these people who she is able to succumb to her wishes. And it only happens when there's one man or one woman in Dobbin's Garden, when the sun is setting between the the spring planting and the fall harvesting. So no one person will go over there by himself. And people say, well, I'll go over with a group. Well, that's okay too, because it's not going to work. She was alone when she died. She was alone when she got that smell, that taste, and everything in her mouth, and that's exactly what she's after. She's after you,
Now,
just
Henry,
you.
have you interviewed any of these men who you mentioned that were beat up by the white woman, or any of the men who were smothered or attempted to be smothered in the summer over by Dobbin's Garden?
Dobbin's Garden. When I started, I'm 71 years old, and I started to do this when I was about 16 because my grandmother got me believing in folklore and legends and everything else, and I believed in it. My heart and soul believed in it. So I started to interview people from the time I was 20 years old, and when I moved back to Belle Island and commuted to St. John's to work, I would do the same thing. I would go in people's houses if they permit me, and they would tell me their stories, men and women. And my grandfather as well. My father was a total disbeliever in anything, but he witnessed the ghost of Dobbin's Garden. And once you're outside the fence of Dobbin's Garden, you're safe. But when you're inside that fence, then you were fair game. And when he started to succumb to the smell, he was leaning on the fence. My father was a big, heavy man. The fence didn't hold, and he fell over. As he fell over and turned to see what was coming up, he tells exactly what I'm telling you. It was like first, as she was coming up, her frock or her coat looked like an off-white, and as she approached, step by step, the whole thing changed. It was the coat went from off-white to a dirty, this color of the swamp, dirty brown, to full of holes, and then she started to crawl on her hands and knees, at which time he fell over the fence. And even then, he had some of the smell of I'm going to call it sulfur, all over him. But he was outside the fence, and when he fell outside the fence, she turned around and went back. Now, my grandfather, who's passed away a long time now, my grandfather was involved in the full experience. Because when they found that he didn't come home, he was one of the first men that's gone back to the 1950s. They came over and got him, and the stench on him was just incredible. And this was told to me by my mother and neighbors up around. And so everybody avoids, as a singular person, avoids Dobbin's Garden. And nobody's stupid enough to go in there by himself or by herself and see if this is going to happen. You can go in winter if you want. You're not going to see the ghost of Dobbin's Garden. Come in the summer, come in the spring, come in the fall, and watch as the sun goes down, and let's see what happens to you.
Now, Henry, what about the white women who have hurt men? Have you interviewed any of the men who have actually been hurt?
Yeah, we over the years I was able to talk to a few men, but the legend stopped in 1960. I believe 1969. I haven't looked at my notes to confirm that, but it's a very good story because, as I said, this woman and this man were carrying on. That's what they called it. That's how all my notes will say, carrying on. And Belle Island was a big place. You got to think, and big place really is compared to Newfoundland. I think Belle Island was the only place that was almost, well, it wasn't as big as St. John's, but it was the biggest place outside of St. John's. At that point in time, there was around 15,000 people living here. So some people didn't get to know some other people as well, and miners and everything else. Anyway, fast forward that, there was also no running water. No pipes in the ground, no long showers, nothing like that. So you slugged your water from a community well. And that's where, of course, a lot of people gathered, and, born young love, etc. And she ended up falling in love and being passionate with an older married man. When she found out that he was married, which took some months, and he said he wasn't going to leave his wife, and she said she was going to tell anyway. So in order to stop that, he strangled her and threw her in the well. Now, it was only less than a week, or maybe a little over a week, that she started to appear. Now, some of these men were beat nearly to a pulp. Some people weren't right afterwards, but they were really, really beat up bad, and they had to go we didn't have a hospital, so they went to the surgery. So some of the nurses, I think there's one nurse who was still alive last time I checked. She tells the story of men coming in, telling this story. There's other men come in who wouldn't tell the story. They wouldn't tell poor old Dr. Templeman who beat him up so bad, but others would. And it looks like this was, say you wrote down on the medical record, you wouldn't put down you beat up by a small woman. That's just, it's not the macho thing to do. But some men would say that they were getting good smacks at this one. It was in the medical notes for these people at the time. And anyway, fast forward, she beat men every now and then, when the mines closed, the targets weren't as easy. In 1969, the man who had killed her had moved away. Everybody knew who killed her, but like this wasn't the 21st century. There's no CSIs, no fingerprints, etc. So everybody knew he was carrying on with her, but it was never questioned, etc. Didn't go any further than that. He moved away with his family up to what is now called Cambridge, but it was called Galt, Ontario. And on his deathbed, years later, on his deathbed, he confessed to the murder of this young woman.
He did.
After that, the hauntings stopped. Her spirit was satisfied.
Oh, okay.
And now what happened after that was just ludicrous, because you got men and women putting on a white sheet and chasing teenagers, which, by the way, did not work out for the men and women all that well at times, because the teenagers chased them back and beat the crap out of them. But that became the woman in white. But they were trying to make fun of the white woman because she had not been seen in a long time.
Right.
And anyway,
So
like I said, I remember as a teenager going out and say, so I saw somebody with a white sheet on. I knew right away what it was somebody with a white sheet on.
Now, it is interesting that you talk about nurses telling the story, writing it into the notes, and that there's a lot of people who have experienced things over at the now standing and operating Bell Island Hospital. Can you speak to that?
Well, I don't know much about the Bell Island Hospital, except that you hear stories about it being somewhat haunted. I've never investigated the hospital. I did investigate the St. Michael's High School out here. I've witnessed actually some events out there. I've witnessed those myself. That's an extremely strange place to be in. It is, even though it's modern, it was built on the grounds of the church out there, St. Michael's Church. And right next to it was a convent, and the priests called a deanery, priest's home. So, there was funerals as well as weddings, etc. And where the high school is today, is where this church once was. And there's been a number of things witnessed out there. I witnessed several of them myself, and it scared the living hell out of me.
Can you tell me about some of the things that you saw there at the high school?
Well, we were out there. That's where Radio Bell Island used to be at one time, and we were out there doing a dial Carol program. In itself, that's nothing. So the gymnasium, which is just off from where our station used to be, I just wandered around because right next to the day was over. So I tell you, it's creepy. And the gym door was open, so I just walked in, just killing time. I walked into the gymnasium. The place is empty, totally empty. It was a nice evening. It was in the first week in December. That's when we always hold our dollar carol. And as I was standing there, 20 feet inside the gym, inside the door in the gym, it was like somebody bounced a basketball off the gymnasium floor, but there was nobody there but me, and it bounced right in front of me. I didn't see no ball, but it's just that sound that was the bounce, and I said, holy shit, that's creepy. And I looked up, I thought it was a fan, or didn't know what it was, if somebody was banging something, and then it banged again. I said, so I'm going to back out of here. I don't know what it was, but I couldn't see it, but I could certainly feel it. So I went out and I got another woman who was helping. I said, just come out, come to the gym. I'm going to show you something, see if this is going to happen. And so we both went out. And we were standing. She said, what are you talking about? I said, wait, no, we're not going to hear it. And we were standing about maybe 3-4 feet apart. And then right between the two of us, bang, was it like that, like a basketball right in front of us. She looked at me and I looked at her, and we both looked at the door and we buggered off, right? That was really, really scary, right? I was in the church and to the high school another time, and a principal was showing me through, and she was talking about the hauntings and everything she had seen, and she said, if you've ever been inside a school and come up to the doors that lead into the classrooms, those locks, when they go through the frame, they're into those locks about an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch along there, and you can actually see the lock on the other side of the frame. So she said, this door opens for no reason. And I said, okay. So she was showing me where different things have happened. So she locked the door, and we walked on past it, And we're going down to another classroom that was known for part of the floor to be very, very hot, and there's no pipes or anything there. So she was just going to take me down there. And as we started walking through that door, we turned around, and here was this door that we just looked through. It was now open.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe it. So we walked back again. It didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right. And the bolt, that's the word I'm searching for, the bolt on the door was still out. It's impossible. It is absolutely 100% impossible for that door to open and have the bolt out the way it was. I couldn't believe it because I had looked at the bolt going through the frame and it was sticking up about 3/4 inches on the other side. I said, now that is scary.
So it sounds like you've had some very bone-chilling experiences yourself.
Yeah, and looking at that and said, oh, why? How? I mean, I said, okay, we go down over the stairs now because I don't want to be here. And it just didn't feel right. The whole corridor in the evening just didn't feel right. And another story that comes from the school, there's actually 4 or 5, maybe 6 that come from the school. There's a teacher who was there. He wasn't there too long, and he was living on Bell Island. So he wanted to do some of his work in the evenings. And he was new to the school. And he had his classroom doors left open. Students are gone, instructors are gone, teachers are gone. So he was just working away. And then he heard somebody, with the old style pencil grinders, pencil sharpeners. And he heard somebody sharpening a pencil. Okay, good enough. So he knew all the teachers, obviously, from a lot of our friends. He goes to the room where he hears the pencil sharpener. There's nobody there. Absolutely nobody there. So he says, okay, good enough. Somebody's playing a trick on me. So he goes back and starts work again. He wasn't sitting in his chair, and the same thing happened again. Now he's starting to get a bit like the hair starting to move up a bit, but he's going to have a look, see who's playing a prank on him. And he went out again, a bit quicker this time, see what was on the go. Second time, no problem. No, still nobody there. And he goes back, but this time he didn't sit down. He goes inside, just inside his classroom, closes the door, and within 2 minutes or less, here's the same sound. Runs out to the same classroom. Nothing happening. So he goes back to his classroom, takes his books, and he heads out. Because he said each time he walked in, it seemed like it was heavier and harder. But he said, that's it, I'm gone. And so many, and other instructors have given the same experience, right?
Well, you said the high school was on the grounds of a church, and I'm sure besides just having funerals, there may have been maybe some unmarked graves or an old cemetery.
There were probably unmarked graves. That's also where some of the sailors, when they go back to World War II, you go back to World War II, and you will. Some of the sailors may have started off their final journey. Say the church was used to, it could have been used to give them their last rites and everything on their way to the grave. Where the church was, like I said, there were some violent deaths on Bell Island. Like, for instance, there was more than one murder on Bell Island over a lifetime. There was a number of nuns who, the nuns kept this place up, and when it was a church. Right, and also the nuns worked at the school until they were all, it got away from that church type thing. So you don't know who the spirits are and what they were. But out in the high school, there's more than one different type of spirit. Most from what we can see, some people have seen nuns, and like I said, I told you about the basketball incident.
Henry, for the listeners, can you get into a little bit more of the history? I know we talked about a little bit about the World War II. Now, from what I'm understanding in the museum, this World War was 1942. There was some German U-boat attacks near Bell Island, and there's actually a Nazi letter there from Hitler and some medals. Are you familiar with that information?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. You were right, correct there in saying that there were two, and Bell Island was also the only landmass in North America that came under direct German attack. That's not a ghost story. That's just frightening. My mother was a young girl when it happened, and people thought when the torpedo struck what was called Scotia Pier, that the Germans were actually invading Bell Island because of the iron ore. But of course, they didn't. But people thought they would. But there were two attacks, the September 5th and then November 2nd, and two ore boats were sank both times, with I believe 69 sailors lost in the two attacks total. So yeah, and when it see, then the Germans were able to operate on Belle Island because prior to World War II, Germany was the biggest supplier. Germany was the biggest market for Belle Island iron ore.
Okay. That explains a lot.
That's the biggest market, right?
Yes, that definitely explains a lot. Now, this letter that's in the museum, is that a copy or is that an actual letter in Hitler's handwriting?
From what I understand, it's the actual letter. Captain Rolf Rutenberger, I believe that's the right pronunciation of his name. He was the captain of one of the U-boats that sunk two ore boats here, and his great granddaughter, I believe, must be 10, maybe a bit longer than that, 10, 12 years ago, donated his medals and his diary to the Miners Museum on Belle Island.
That's a pretty amazing that we have the actual, historical items there. Has any of the people of Belle Island ever done any kind of ghost hunt or investigation of the museum of these artifacts?
No, because the number two mines, where the mine tour is, that closed on 1950, somewhere along there. That was closed a long while before the other mines did, and there weren't a lot of men, very few men that were killed in number two mines. So the hauntings down there are not, I'm going to call it spectacular, as compared to number 3 and number 4 mine, which closed much later in the 1960s. Matter of fact, number 3 being the last one that closed in 1966. So, and there was an awful lot of, every miner's death was horrific, but in the number 3 and number 4 mines, like there was blasting that took place that where men company introduced new dynamite, but they didn't tell the blasters. The blasters went back to what they considered their safe distance, and they're blown to pieces because the dynamite was like 30% more powerful. There was when the miners there's a job called face cleaning, which, by the way, is face cleaning is the rock above your head. Once everything was blasted out before the muckers, that was the guy who would clean up the iron ore before they went in. Face cleaners would have come in and scrape the loose rock off the ceiling. Sometimes it was a little bit of a rock, sometimes it was a ton of rock, and if you weren't fleet of foot, then you were a dead man.
So, Henry, do you think that these mines running all throughout underneath Belle Island, and oh, by the way, for the listeners who don't know, these mines also run under the water out in the Tickle. Do you think that this is causing some of the hauntings?
They don't run on. They probably have very little to do with the hauntings, except probably number 3 and number 4. Whereas when this crew of psychics were here, they felt the spirits of the miners really big time down in number 4 mine collar, because as I said, number 2 is open. Number 3 has not yet to be open, but we're hoping to open that for different things. But number 4 mine collar, and when I say mine collar, this collar. The collar is an actually 200-foot concrete structure that leads into number 4, and there's a big wooden wall that keeps you from entering. And psychics and a lot of people who act down in that 200-foot collar believe that they sense and feel and hear things all the time, and I'm one of them. Whatever's behind that door is pretty much, I don't think the miners are harmful, but they're certainly at the best of times lonely and appreciate the company. But they can't leave the mine. They can't leave that collar. And so when the spirits go down there, they can bounce around, they can move around, but they really can't move out of the collar.
Have you heard any of the people who do the diving tour on Ocean Quest? They actually dive in the mine down there. Have they told you any stories, or have you heard of any?
No, they dive from number 2 mine. I guess that's the only place accessible for that. And as soon as they dive in, the water goes from ceiling to floor. So there's and as dark, it is just pitch black. The only thing they have is their lights that'll keep them going, and they make sure their safety net or safety wires on them, so they'll be able to get back before they run out of air. But they've seen artifacts